Well, hi, friends. Welcome. Welcome to this cozy little afternoon chat with my friend Steve. That's what we should have titled it, Steve.
We should have.
A cozy little afternoon chat. It's for some of you, it's evening, and you might be having dinner. If so, thanks for being here. It's so funny to try and pick what is the time that is right for everybody across the nation and in the overseas. But if you're joining us internationally and it's late at night, thanks for being here. So today we're talking about building a college list, and I'll introduce Steve in just a few minutes. I think it sometimes embarrasses you when I do the big long intro, so I'm going to spare you that, and I'm going to keep it relatively short.
Good.
But before we do that, if you haven't seen the poll yet, please check in. Are you a student, parent, or counselor? We've got so far about half counselors and the other half student parents, which is lovely. Our check-in question is, what's an identity that you're leaning into these days that you'd love to explore further in college? And we've got two quick announcements type things. We've got a course coming up in about a month, actually 5 weeks. There's a course for counselors and there's a course for students, and it's all on college list building. So this is sort of a sneak peek at that. You could call it like session 0, where we're getting into conversation about some of the themes that we'll be talking about more on the course. So Alex, who is moderating today, thanks Alex, will share a note about that in the chat. Some of you already signed up for it. We'll see you soon. And the other mini announcement is that we're hiring. We're hiring for both full-time and part-time roles. And there's like a little page that we'll send out as well in the chat. So if you're interested in spending more time with us at CEG, we'd love to connect with you.
And that's very exciting, Ethan.
It is exciting.
Congratulations.
Thanks. Yeah.
I've known you since even before College Essay Guy. And
Indeed.
College Essay Guy has certainly grown. So congratulations.
Thanks. It's become a thing that's no longer College Essay Guy, like almost doesn't fit anymore because it's not just the College Essay Guy.
Right.
So well, this is the awkward moment sometimes when someone's moderating, where someone launches into like a prepared it's like statement about someone's bio. But instead of doing that, I actually want to just speak a little bit personally about who Steve has been to me, and I'm going to speak about Steve in the third person for a second, and then I'm going to turn to you in the second person, Steve. But when I started out thinking about, do I want to be a college essay guy, I was taking a course in the UC Irvine program, and Steve was my professor, and he was talking about independent educational consulting, which was something that I didn't really know a lot about. And through awesome mentorship and sharing of resources and generosity, I think, Steve, I'm going to switch to the second person. I think you really modeled for me how to be an awesome counselor. And one of the things I've been interested in and seeing is like, just there's so many. Steve is this is now in the third person, kind of a legendary figure in this world in terms of creating lots of resources that have been, scooped up and that folks have used. One of them is he's got a couple books, including the College Finder, College Match, that students have used to find best fit colleges, and has also been instrumental in helping create certification for counseling and for independent educational consulting in particular. It's I think of it as the highest degree that you can get as a certified educational planner. So Steve's background is working with the University of Denver for a number of years in admissions. And yeah, Steve, I'm so grateful for your friendship over the years and all you've contributed to our profession. And I'm so excited to be here with you today.
I'm glad to be here with you, Ethan. And I remember one of our first conversations. You called and you said, do you think there's anything wrong with my sharing all of this information? and you have, through the years, been so generous. You were nice enough to mention some things that I've done, but you have shared all kinds of information, certainly about essays and many other topics that have made our lives much easier.
Well, thanks, bro. It's good to be here with you,
bro.
So here's what we're covering today. But before I even get into the bullet points, I want to know what's top of mind with y'all. So I'll use terms like bro and y'all throughout. I'll be sprinkling them throughout. But I want to ask y'all to just tap in for a second and go, what am I interested in? What am I nervous about? And if you could give it the form of a question and put it into the chat, that would be helpful for us, especially in the second half of our conversation today. I've got some questions that I think might be some things. I'm trying to guess at some things that you might be wondering about. I'll share those in just a second, but there's going to be stuff that we are missing by just having these 5 questions. So I want you to, some of you are doing it already, which is lovely. And then Alex behind the scenes is going to put them onto our Google Doc. And what the job of me as moderator today is basically going to be try and grab some that I think are going to be most interesting or useful for the widest number of folks. All right, some things we'll cover today. First, what makes a college great for students? Like, what does that even mean? What's a great college? What are some mistakes that students and counselors, because half of us here are counselors, make when creating a college list? How do we contextualize US News and World Report rankings? Because I'll say for myself, I don't think that they are just evil. There's sometimes that belief out there that they're just like, don't look at them at all, they're bad. And, I certainly can see how some folks arrive at that, but I'll just say at the start here, they might have their place, but what are some important ways to contextualize what US News and World Report ratings mean and how they can be useful? We'll talk about the role that parents can play in this process. We'll talk about the role that counselors can play. And then we'll talk just a little bit about, we've got some new software that's popped up in the last few months, this Chat GPT. Is there a place for it? Are there some things that it can do well? Are there some things that, some ways that it could potentially hinder? And I might even weigh in on that just a little bit. And then a lot of it's going to be Q&A with y'all. So that's the plan. That's what's on the menu. So I'm just going to jump right in. Steve, when someone asks you, or when you think about what makes a great college, I'm leaving it intentionally vague here. What comes to mind?
I like to think of a great college as a place where a student can become all that they are capable of becoming. I like to think of it as a place where that student is going to grow. And the particular pieces of that, I think, are where you're going to be pushed but not shoved. In other words, where the academics is right for you. Again, right for you meaning growing and really engaged in the academic experience. I think a great college is also a place that you are learning more about yourself, a place where you're learning more about other people. And that's why diversity and campus culture are so important. And a place where you're going to learn more about the world. It's more important than ever, it seems like, in 2023, that we see higher education as a place to develop citizens and to mold future leaders. And then, of course, a great college is a place where you're going to be happy, where the environment and you are attuned to the extent that that you can grow and you can learn and you can push yourself. That's why I sometimes think that that we ought to take risk into account a little bit more when we start thinking about a good match. Because I think that sometimes, and we could say more about this, but I think that sometimes to really grow, you do need to push yourself a little bit and take a little bit more of a risk. But those are the things that I tend to go back to when I think about building a list and think about creating a list for a student.
This is a question that I didn't say that we were going to ask, but I'm kind of curious as you think back to your own process of thinking about college and applying back in the day, what would you have done differently in terms of your own relationship to that whole process?
Well, it truly is back in the day in my case. And back in the day, I would have engaged in the process. I was so active on the newspaper staff and all kinds of other things that I was doing in high school, and trying to be cool and trying to fit in and all of those things, that really college planning was not something that I put a priority on. And it turned out that I went to one of the local schools, Colorado State, and really the reason that I went there as opposed to the University of Colorado was because of a stupid reason, which was that my brother and sister both went to the University of Colorado, and of course I wanted to be different than that. So that whole experience led me to really realize what mistakes I made and how to try to help people do a better job than I did.
And when you see, given that you've been doing this for a few years,
Forever.
more than a few, I wasn't going to say it, I'll let you say it. What are some of the mistakes that you see students, parents, counselors make?
Well, I was hoping you would ask that because I have been thinking about it. And there are several mistakes. One is only applying to selective colleges. Even if you've done really, really well, the idea of having your apply list filled with schools that accept less than 15% of their applicants is ridiculous. Not considering different types of schools, I think, is a mistake. Meaning, I think that everyone, at least I try my best to encourage students to push the envelope. If they're thinking that they're going to go to a large state university, perhaps applying to one smaller liberal arts or small liberal arts and sciences college. I think that pushing the envelope, if you're looking at just STEM, maybe one school that's a little broader in focus, makes a lot of sense, particularly when we're talking about determining the schools to at least consider. I think ignoring financial considerations early enough. I encourage parents. There's every reason to share concerns about cost. Cost is a major factor for most all students that are going through this process, or at least, let's say, 5% maybe is where cost is not a significant factor. Like I was saying with myself, I think that it is a mistake not to spend enough time visiting. I think it's a mistake to visit in a cursory fashion. I see a lot of students visiting and not spending enough time on a campus, not asking enough questions, not really exploring their time on the campus, relying too heavily on rankings. And I know we're going to be talking about that. And I'm with you, Ethan. I certainly almost always encourage families to look at the rankings, but I want them to know what they're looking at. And so we talk about that. I think another mistake is probably not using some of the college planning months to research careers. And the goal is not necessarily to decide on what you want to do, but it is to learn more about a career in X, a career in Y, what you need for that career, how competitive it is, how much earning. I do think that time spent on that is time well spent. Those are some of the mistakes that I think about immediately.
Yeah, say more about, I want to double click here on the US News and World Report. Is there a place for them or not? And in what context? Like, what is the information? You said something like, I want them to know what they're looking at. What are they looking at when they're looking at US News and World Report?
Well, you can get the breakdown of what percent of the U.S. news is reputational data, what percent is based on the money that the college has, how much of the ranking is based on the selectivity. Once you identify what those things are that they're looking for, you can say, is this really important to me? Is this factor significant? Is prestige really very, very important to me? How does that fit in with how I'm going to grow, how I'm going to learn, how I'm going to be successful at a particular school? So in the past, or at least I've gone through phases in my own practice here where I've sort of poo-pooed the rankings and said, don't look at them, and they're worthless, etc. Now I feel like explaining, looking at again how the rankings work is best. And I also like to point this out. We as a society love rankings. I mean, we rank everything, it seems. And there seems to be a great love of rankings, and so it's not surprising that colleges are ranked. It's interesting to think about the things that we don't rank. For example, we don't rank churches, and we don't rank churches because how could we possibly rank this religion up against this religion, and this dogma up against that dogma, and so forth and so on. But when you think about it, higher education is just as complex. And to try to throw it all, and even if you do national and liberal art, even if you divide by a few characteristics, you're still putting apples in with oranges, and it's totally therefore not fair. And the schools that don't have as many resources, that don't have the ability to pay their professors as much, that might want to have a little bit more of a open admission environment, those schools suffer in the ratings.
Valerie is asking, how important do you, Steve, think that the 4-year graduation rate is versus, say, the 6-year rate, which is sometimes published or maybe not published at all?
I certainly look at both the 4-year and the 6-year graduation rate. The thing that I like to consider about those numbers is the financial fact that there are a number of students that will leave a school because their family just cannot pay the freight, and they're maybe not getting the scholarships that they need, or the family has other needs. So I like to look at the 4-year rates. I like to look at retention rates, but again, in context with a bunch of other factors.
Yeah, and there are so many factors.
So many.
Yeah. When you think about the parent's role, like, is there a way that is there a thing that you find yourself saying all the time? Or is there a metaphor or an analogy that you use when it comes to the role that they can and maybe even should play in this process?
Um, I tend to encourage parent involvement and encourage students to listen to their parents. Um, I, um, I say to parents that no one knows that student as well as they do. Um, I think that their role in articulating the factors or helping you as a counselor or helping to determine what those how those features ought to interact so that the student is able to grow and learn and develop and have a successful experience. I think that those things are important. I also feel like the part of the parental involvement in searching for a college is to know when to be involved and when to pull back.
Mhm.
And I feel like on college visits, for example, the student ought to be the leader. In fact, through the process, I think that the student ought to be given the responsibility of doing the heavy lifting on research. Speaking of research, when I ask students to begin to research, I frequently will encourage them to have their parents do part of it. In other words, while the student is looking for, oh, I don't know, let's say the program in physics, the dad might be looking at the financial aid opportunities at a bunch of schools and the cost issues, and the mom might be looking at the safety issues or something like that, and then come together perhaps once a week and share perspectives. You know, here's how it looks from a cost standpoint. Here's how it looks from a major standpoint. Here's how it looks from a social standpoint, or whatever. Um, so I guess what I feel is parents are knowledgeable, and their voice should be heard. I've already mentioned that I sometimes feel like the cost discussion doesn't take place early enough. And I think that's I think that's a mistake. I think a good counselor has a parent curriculum,
Mhm.
is sending things and interacting with parents with a purpose. Here are things that I think are really important, and I want to share those facts with you and those perceptions. There's all kinds of good articles about not being too prestige oriented, or how to deal with cost and so forth. Lots of those things you can direct to parents, and I think that will help them.
I love that. Is it different for counselors? Like, what role can or should counselors play in the process?
Well, in my way of looking at things, the counselor is a central person in the in the process of picking a great college. A good counselor is not only someone who has information, and that information is frequently information about good fit colleges, but even more important than that, the counselor is providing wisdom. The counselor, a good counselor is understands the world of colleges and the world broadly in ways that allow that counselor to put in context the importance or lack thereof of major, to put in context the sort of what the goals are in terms of thinking about a career as a high school student. The counselor can provide wisdom in many areas. I frequently say to students and parents that a little bit of confusion about this stuff is okay. And that's not particularly insightful, but it's it I think can help move things along, particularly when a student says all colleges sound the same and they all seem just like every other one. I think that the counselor provides wisdom, like making it clear that there's fun at all size colleges. If a college has 2,000 students, it would not survive if people weren't having fun. So the notion that fun is only possible at a big university is nonsense. Those kinds of wise, insightful thinking, I think, is the purpose of a good counselor, and to keep things in focus, to keep things moving, to have clear cut timetables, to enable the student to know what resources are good and what resources are less than good. I think that's extremely important. And so I encourage every counselor, public, school-based or independent, to have a list of resources. Here's what I consider to be the best websites, the best books, that sort of thing, in a world which is filled with information about colleges, can be really helpful.
There are a couple of great questions that have come in that folks are upvoting. By the way, if you see a question that you like, and feel free to scan up to the questions that have already been put into the chat, because it could be that someone is speaking in your mind. That tends to happen in large groups. Just give it a little thumbs up. And if you don't know how to give it the thumbs up, or if you're working on an old version of Zoom, you can actually just do a thumbs up emoji, or you can write the words thumbs up underneath the question. But one of the ones that came up when you were talking earlier about risk in the list development process, I think students, parents, and counselors might be interested to know more about what you mean by risk. Like, what does it mean to have a list, a college list of, and we can get into like how many schools, but of X number of schools that involves risk? Like, what's a healthy amount of risk?
Yeah. What I mean by risk is where, let me give you an example. I think that maybe that will be the best way to handle this. I worked with a student the year before last, and she found pretty much everything that she wanted at the University of Puget Sound. She loved the outdoor, the academic program was really for her. She liked the location in Washington, et cetera, et cetera. She also was considering Bryn Mawr, and she did not want a women's college initially. So to some extent, Bryn Mawr was a risk. It was also a risk because she was not as familiar with the East Coast and was not as familiar with Philadelphia as she was with Washington State. So on a whole host of factors, the choice of Bryn Mawr was a riskier choice for her. Now, I made the case that because cost was not an issue given the finances that she got at both schools, I made the case that there were lots of things that she ought to consider, and that risk was one of them, and that part of her decision making was how comfortable would she be with those unknowns at Bryn Mawr and more knowns at Puget Sound. So that's the kind of situation that I think that as parents or as counselors, we need to be open to that, because part of fit is taking a risk to a certain extent.
Yeah, I love that. I appreciate that. And I'm appreciating also the thumbs ups that are happening in the chat, both when Steve is sharing and also I love that Zoom now allows us to do this. It's making for a more interactive session, which I'm enjoying. There's some folks who are interested in hearing more about test optional. So Cynthia asked, for example, with things being test optional, students wanting to apply to 20 to 30 schools, what's the best way to talk to students and families about a better strategy? Are we doing students a disservice by limiting the number of schools they apply to? And so there's question one, which is something like how to talk about applying in a test optional landscape. And I'm also just curious, so as an option B, how has your thinking about developing a college list changed in a more test optional landscape?
There's so many factors here. So let me take pieces of this. I don't think my counseling has changed much in terms of test optional. I don't think that suddenly new schools are possible for someone who may not have been eligible for those schools or likely admits for those schools in the past. I think test optional it gives students an advantage, and I'm for anything that helps students with anything that gives students more choice in the process. My own approach to this is that I believe that if possible, in terms of their priorities of high school, if possible, I encourage students to prepare for the tests as if they're going to submit the tests, just because I see a lot of students who are great test takers who just don't want to take the test, who just feel like, well, I don't need them now. And I think that is a mistake in the current admissions landscape. So I do encourage students to, again, given their priorities, I make it clear that it's certainly more important to get a better grade in a class than to put hours into test prep, but I do think that consideration of taking the test. I think most students should try both the ACT and the SAT, and I see a lot of students who do not, who just feel like whatever the test is that their particular state uses is what they ought to take, and that certainly is a mistake, because there's a lot of students that are in SAT states that might do better on the ACT and vice versa. So those are some initial thoughts, but I think I'm not answering pieces of your
I
question,
mean,
Ethan.
I did a bad interview job where I asked you like a complex question, and then I was like, and here's a second one. So that's hard to hold two questions in the mind. But part of what Cynthia is asking is like, I think you've kind of answered it, where what I heard in the question is there a better strategy than applying to 20 to 30 schools in a test optional landscape? And you saying, I think you answered it by saying, actually it's still, students are going to apply and it doesn't actually change all that much is what I hear you saying. A related question though here is, when students are trying to figure out, these are the schools that I'm pretty sure I can get into, which we sometimes call likely. These are the schools that I maybe can get into. And these are the schools that I'm probably not going to get into, but I really want to try because those seem awesome. What are some ways that you advise folks to figure out which is even in which quote unquote category?
Okay. First of all, I dislike using the words reach or likely or backup. Reach sounds like a dream to me. Backup sounds like a booby prize. I much prefer saying low chance of admission, medium chance of admission, and high chance of admission, because we're only talking about admission here. We're not talking about fit. We're not talking about anything else. So I prefer to refer to reach schools as low chance of admission schools. And as far as the numbers, students are applying to more schools, and I think that probably makes some sense. On the other hand, if a student is applying to more than about a dozen schools, I think it's pushing it. I think that most students ought to be able to get down to that number, maybe even less. The student who's applying to 20 or 30 colleges is playing games of some sort most of the time. I understand all the uncertainties in both admission and particularly in merit aid. So I can see applying to a few more schools, but I do think that if you're a parent, you ought to encourage your student to not overdo it. And anyone who applies to more than 15, 16 schools is applying to too many. How you determine where they are in the in this breakdown, I think the best way is to look at the percent of students admitted, the overall percent of students admitted. I find that some of the sites that list the GPA averages or before COVID test scores, I find that information to be less reliable than the percent of students admitted. So that in almost all cases, if a school, for example, is admitting less than 15 or 20% of their students, that's going to be a low chance of admission school for everybody, even the top student and the most active and the most scholarly and so forth. A school that is admitting 70 or 80%. I'm throwing out these numbers. I'm not sure that they're accurate, but a school that is admitting that many, maybe a little bit less, it would probably be a higher chance of admission. But it's a crazy world, as many of our of us know as counselors or as parents who have read this material. I'm working with a student this year who was waitlisted at Northeastern and admitted to Brown. You know, and these types of things happen all the time because of lots of factors, the reasons that that we could go into. But because of those uncertainties, you do want to apply to a few more, but you don't want to apply to that many. And furthermore, you know, high school ought not to just be about getting into college. You know, it ought to be about relationships with friends and parents, and to apply to 20 or 30 colleges and complete all of those essays and so forth. It takes your time away from the goodness of a senior year.
Mhm. From playing more games is what I say. And Tanya's making a great point that it's important to, in some cases, look at the admitted per major. For example, if it's computer science, you know, some of these majors are more impacted, which means that more students are applying to try to get into these. So if you're ever uncertain, or you think it's like, oh, I'm not sure how to find out if it's more competitive at a particular major, this is a great thing to email and ask the school about, and to begin to develop, in some cases, a relationship with the counselor, especially if it's a small school, and to just get real curious about that, because that's something that they're, in many cases, I found, found admission officers willing to answer. Some questions I see them, like if you ask them, what are your institutional priorities, which is to say, like, which groups of students are you accepting more of this year? I find them to be less willing to share that. But another thing that I'll sometimes say is, like, if you're not sure if it's like a reach or a maybe, or let's use it, low chance of acceptance or middle chance of acceptance, go conservative. Like, assume that it's right. A low chance of acceptance. Like, bump up. If it's in between two categories, bump to the other category.
And Ethan, your point reminds me, I don't think students contact universities often enough. And granted, you know, the UCs are, you know, huge, and the large state schools, but most admission offices are willing to answer student queries, and a simple email asking about admission in computer science, as you mentioned, is a good thing to do. A student contacting a faculty member in a particular in a department of interest to find out a little bit more about the department and the specializations within the department. Those things can be very helpful to the student in terms of information, and might also be helpful in terms of admission.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that point. I'm going to grab a couple more questions that are coming through here. Thanks again for the upvotes here. Someone asked just a few minutes ago, to what extent is the junior year course selection important when determining, likelihood, not likelihood of acceptance, but let me see how it's worded. But for juniors, how significant is their choice of, I'm bad. Sorry, Jim, I missed it. For juniors, how significant is their choice of senior year curriculum in the application process?
Well, the rigor of the courses is the most important thing in the college admission world. And so there is nothing as important as both the junior year curriculum and the senior year curriculum. And I frequently ask a student to think about their classes for the next year on the following criteria. Is this the highest level of class that you could take in that field? In other words, whether we're talking about English or math or science or what have you, the highest level, and where you have a good chance of getting the grade that you want to get, and where you can have a life. Mm-hmm. And that's a hard, I mean, it's hard for students to do that. But it's a worthwhile point of discussion, I think, because it says to the student, you know, I want you to have a good high school experience, but I also want you to think about your own capabilities and your own motivations, and think about those three factors as you select. Students who one last thing about this,
Mhm.
students um, who slack off in their senior year curriculum are typically, particularly in the last couple of years, students that I have seen more apt to be rejected or waitlisted than
Mm.
those who are really pushing.
Yeah, to your point about, students who, this is going back a minute, but students who get into X but don't get into Y, there are so many examples of that. Some folks are saying in the chat it's totally random. I mean, yeah, it can feel really random, in many cases. But, and I linked a resource for y'all
And
again.
and that's I'm sorry,
No, no,
Ethan.
no, please go.
I was just going to say, this is what I like to call inoculation of telling a student that these sorts of things can happen. That you could get into a low chance of admission school and not into a high chance. I think the more, either as counselors or as parents, the more we can inoculate, the more we can we can talk about some of the things that they're likely to encounter. The more that we can talk about, for example, most people don't know about very many colleges. They know about the Ivy League colleges, and they may know about schools that are athletic powers,
Right.
but most people that they will meet in the mall or wherever are not going to know about most schools. That doesn't mean that the school is not good.
Right. Yeah. What are some ways that, besides visiting, let's say someone can't afford to visit, or they just don't have time, or resources prevent them from visiting, how do you get the sense of the vibe of a school? Just what's your sense?
Well, the interesting thing, given your question, I actually found that there were some benefits during the COVID period for people not to visit, because I found that students were doing a better job of researching. They were because I do feel like a lot of students think that visiting is researching, that's the only way to research. How do you get a sense of the vibe? Well, the more resources you can access, the better. I think that the Fisk guide, particularly the paragraphs on student life and what kids are doing on the weekends and what clubs are popular, I think those paragraphs are more reliable than the paragraphs on the academic programs. So I like to encourage students to look at those paragraphs. For a student who hasn't done who's not an A student, or who wants a broader group of schools that then is included in Fisk, I think Orr's book of America's Best Colleges for B students is really helpful. I feel like there are a number of sites. Black Excel or the Hispanic Association of Colleges and Universities have a lot of good information. Tribal colleges also. The religious groups have done a pretty good job. There's good information, both books and websites. Christian colleges, Catholic colleges, Hillel for Jewish students. I think that the some of the sites where you can find student newspapers for colleges and universities. Again, some papers are better, some papers are more representative of a college than others, but that's another way to get a sense for the vibe. Social media. I do think that some of the Reddit has some good information about colleges and some good information, particularly on the culture and the feel for the college. I was thinking of the Chamber of Commerce, particularly for colleges that are in smaller rural towns. Sometimes looking at the Chamber of Commerce website to see what the city is sponsoring and what they're doing can be helpful. So I'm probably forgetting some the videos. I think post COVID, there's never been better videos of colleges, both colleges on their own website, and also the Campus Reel and U University TV, campus tours. Some of those sites can be very helpful.
Thanks. This is great. I want to ask you in a minute about, Chat GPT and artificial intelligence and what your take is on that. Before I do, I want to just do a quick PSA in case folks came in late that we've got a course coming up. I'm going to just do a quick screen share just so you can see what the course is. And it's called How to Build a Great College List. And we've got 2 separate sessions. We've got a session for counselors. We've got a session for students. And they're taught on the same days. We're going to do kind of like a morning session. And part of what we're going to do on the student families course is really practically walk you through, like, what are the steps to actually go through? What are the resources that Steve uses? What are the resources that I use? How do we find a school that actually is a good fit? And also, what are some of our favorite resources for figuring out cost? How do colleges pick students? We'll talk a little bit about. We'll talk more about what is the right number for particular students. And then on the counselor course, we've got a slightly different set of questions that we're exploring. And one of the great values, I think, of the counselor course is what's happening in the chat right now. Like, there's a thing that I was just like, Steve, can you give me more examples of X student got into Y but not Z, and just a whole bunch of people are responding. Part of what we'll be doing on that counselor course in particular is asking questions and kind of crowdsourcing some of these things, like the what are you hearing? And it's fun to do that in community in this sort of like much more open way. For example, one of the exercises we'll do will be about, let's create, what are schools that are good for this particular type of student, or that you would add to this particular type of list. And so you'll, if you kind of opt into that, you'll get the advantage of hearing from other counselors. What would they put on their list? So it's pretty fun, and it's pretty communal. So hope to see some of y'all there. So Steve, what is your sense about this artificial intelligence? I mean, there's a lot we don't know yet, but what are your early returns or sort of gut reactions to this Chat GPT thing and artificial intelligence? Is there a place for it? What's your sense?
Well, I hope you will comment as well, because you are much more versed on it than I am. My thoughts. I've been playing around with it the last few weeks. It's fun. It's fascinating to see text just coming at you in response to particular queries. It's not going to replace the counselor. And it's not going to replace the counselor for several reasons. One is the information that is generated may not be accurate, but also it's not creative. And I think that the development of a good list is creative. It's taking into account a lot of things that are more slippery than Chat GPT can come up with, how you balance or take into account the academic intensity of a particular school, or the motivation that's necessary to be successful, those kinds of things. And the last thing I will say about this is that AI is by definition not emotional. And I think a lot of the selection of good fit schools is emotional. It's a connection with you and the kind of personality that you have, the kind of abilities that you have. So those are some thoughts, but I would love to hear from you, Ethan.
I love what you're saying. I mean, I really vibe with the first point that you made about, yeah, it is fascinating. And I think that it is generating some really cool stuff. But I think your point is right. I mean, I think it's still early in sort of like ChatGPT land. And we've seen in the news almost like newly famous examples of like people giving, or not people, like people giving prompts into this thing and, sort of getting wrong answers to things, basic things like what's 2 + 2. So that's something that I think I would like caution folks again, like if you are using something like this, to really double check with a human, with a college counselor, an independent consultant, so that that this is good information, and then to do your own research. I'm excited by it because I think that there are some cool possibilities in terms of just, I mean, I think this thing is so fresh and we're still like discovering it all together. So I think I don't know yet what the applications are going to be. I think that it's been interesting to ask it about certain like programs. Like if I'm trying to research a program, tell me about the English program at Boston University. What are some of those things? Like it'll spit out some cool things. Now, do I take it all at face value? Maybe, I just want to tell folks to like, be sure to ask ChatGPT to like cite its sources. That's a really important step here. But I think it's new. And the other thing is, and I want to ask you about this too, but like, I feel like in a world, and somebody asked this in the chat, how could ChatGPT impact the college essay writing process and review process? And I feel like if there are more instant answers, for example, or instant writing that happens, first of all, I worry about the ethics of it with essay writing, but I feel like if there's something that maybe gets missed or gets skipped over if we're kind of moving into this instant answers world. And I'm not saying like it's nutritional or good and healthy to like take a long time in your research. Like, yeah, sometimes getting research done faster is better, but there's like this whole thing that's happening with students through this process. I'm going to talk about essay writing because that's what I know the best. And it feels like there's this sort of like the process of coming up with ideas and iterating on those ideas. And, you use whatever word you want, ideating. Like there's a thing that's doing to students in terms of building their confidence and teaching them that, hey, these ideas, like I can come up with cool ideas and I can iterate and create a thing and feel really proud of that thing and then have it represent me. I just think that if students were to move towards a more sort of rushing towards the output or the quote unquote product, that they miss out on this whole journey that really, for me, is what this whole process is about. A segue question that I have for you, Steve, is like, when you think about what is possible in this, let's call it the college list building process, what is this really about on a deeper level, or what can it be about?
I think it is about growth, development, helping a young person, as I said at the first, be all that they are capable of being. I think that is the goal. And it strikes me that for almost every student, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of choices. And it's hard because a lot of times students want to look at the glass being half empty as opposed to the glass being 9/10 full. But we have to continue to, as counselors or as parents, we have to continue to talk about all of those possibilities that exist, if only the student is open to those options.
Mhm. Yeah, thank you. A couple folks have asked, Steve, and we'll do this question. We'll do one more maybe because we're almost at time here. Well, we're actually at time. Carla's asking, is there going to be an updated College Finder book? Inquiring minds want to know.
Yes, there will be. And thank you for asking. And if anyone has suggestions for new lists, College Finder, we have a team of people researching now. I hope that book is out by the end of the year, but open for suggestions on new lists.
So, because somebody's going to ask, how do they submit those ideas for new lists?
Just send me the idea.
Awesome. You can reach Steve through his
Steve at schoolbuff.com.
Boom, there it is. There we go. I'm going to pick one more question here from the list. I'm just going to dive back into it. You know what? I kind of want to leave it with you, Steve, like rather than diving into like a question that I think folks like, what is something that in the spirit of takeaways that you hope that let's go with students and parents now here, because we've talked to counselors a little bit, that you feel is really important to keep top of mind as they're going through this process?
I'm not sure it's the most important, but I do think that what you're looking for as a parent, one of the things that you're looking for in trying to differentiate one college from another is, what is the glue that binds that community together? Is it is it skiing? Is it alcohol? Is it intellectual inquiry? I do think that question about campus community doesn't get as much play as I think it should.
I love it. I love that. That's a new one for me. I appreciate that. Thanks, Steve. As always, thanks for being here and for all
Thank you very much,
Yeah.
and thanks to everybody who attended.
Y'all will see you soon. Bye.